So my name is Kristen Schafer. I'm with Pesticide Action Network, and I want to tell you kind of what our format is going to be this afternoon. So we're each going to talk a little bit about who we are and what our work is and how it's connected to pollinator issues, and then tell you what our topic is that we're going to focus on. And then each of us will give a brief presentation, 10, 15 minutes, about pollinator issues and the work that we're doing. And then we'll each focus in on how you all can get involved, how people can help and get engaged around pollinator protection. And then we will definitely have time for discussion. So be thinking about questions you have. We want to leave a good chunk of 10, at least 15 minutes at the end to have questions. So be thinking about that as we go. So with that, I will pass it along to maybe Sue. You could start and just do a brief introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Is this one working? Oh yeah, it is, cool. I'm Sumi and I'm with People in Pollinators Action Network, which is a statewide organization here in Colorado. Okay, who here is from Colorado? Okay, good. You're in our geographic area. So what we do is we do a variety of things. So we do local organizing around helping people figure out how to change their own practices in their own backyards as well as in their local communities. We work at the state legislature. We work with national groups as well, and we do a lot of work around protecting habitat and also changing habitat, like transitioning habitats that maybe public entities have been managing with a chemically intensive management style, and transitioning that to a more natural, hopefully organic strategy. We work some with agriculture, with trying to help farmers figure out how to get off chemically intensive strategies. And we work with the state legislature as well as state administrative departments like the Department of Natural Resources, or now actually with a new ag commissioner with the Department of Ag, and the Department of Transportation. We were responsible for getting the first Colorado pollinator highway designated. I-76 from the Nebraska border to Denver is Colorado's first pollinator highway, and so we've done volunteer projects planting along that strip, and we'll be doing some more this fall. So we do a lot of things, local level and statewide level, and until as of next week, this won't be true, but we are fiscally sponsored by the Pesticide Action Network, but we just got our own nonprofit status, so we're going to be an independent organization very soon, like in a week.
That's awesome, Sue. Thanks. It's great to be with both of you. Thank you all for taking time out today to hang out with us and talk about pollinators. My name is Jennifer Holmes. I think we have some feedback.
I turned this off. It's the wind, actually.
Okay. Let me see. Is this better? So I work also, like Sue, on a national level, a state level, and a local level. I serve as the president for our state beekeeping organization, which is about 99 years old, and really has been working hand in hand with our state legislators over the years to make sure that beekeeping is something that is allowable in our state, and also the Department of Agriculture. So we get involved in a lot of lawmaking, policy, and things that protect pollinators. It's a very diverse subject. It really is. And land use, I could go on and on for hours and hours. But all of it is really extremely important, and we'll delve into why. And hopefully a lot of you are here because you also want to be active in making sure pollinators are protected and have resources. And if we can work together and at least leave with something together after all of this time to create a better forage environment for all pollinators. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. Slow Bees through Slow Food International in USA is now an active new community. I happen to have had a hand in that community coming about with other delegates of Terra Madre, so through Slow Food International, because it's just that important that we all act together now and protect all the pollinators. So thank you.
I'm going to use this one so that we don't get feedback. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you both. Again, my name is Kristen Schafer. I'm the Executive Director at Pesticide Action Network, and we're a national organization. It's actually our 35th anniversary year. We were founded as part of a global network in Malaysia, actually, of citizens that work toward a healthy, just, and resilient food and farming system. So we connect with citizens around the world and organizations that have that mission. Here in the U.S., we work with, in coalition with people who are on the front lines of industrial agriculture. So we work with farm worker organizations. Oh, that is the wind. We work with farmers and beekeepers. We also work with rural communities, indigenous communities, and children. So those are people that are most directly affected by industrial agriculture. And we work at the national level in coalition on various policy issues. And then we also have, including pollinators, and then we also have campaigns in 4 key states. So that's Hawaii, California, Minnesota, and Iowa. And our offices are in California and Minneapolis. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about to kind of kick us off is just an overview of the problem of pollinator decline in recent years. Can you guys, here, I'm going to turn this way. There we go. Oh, look at you, Jennifer. And kind of where the science is right now and some of the key issues around policy as well. So just to kind of get us started. So as you all know, pollinators are key to our food system. You've probably heard the statistic that 1 of 3 bites of food rely on pollinators. Mostly, I'm going to focus on information about honeybees in this conversation, but I just want to say, because that's where a lot of the data is, it's being tracked, but just to say there are 4,000 different types of pollinators that have been affected by this crisis and are at risk. Many of them are also threatened. For example, 28% of the bumblebees in North America are currently at risk of extinction. I want to show you, actually I have a couple show and tell things here. I don't know how well y'all can see this. I just have one, but yeah, maybe pass that around. So this is a map that shows trends in wild pollinator, basically habitat and populations. And you can see, so the yellow is where they're declining and the blue is where they're stable or increasing. What's interesting, and we work a lot on pesticide issues, obviously, that is an almost direct overlay with pesticide use maps. If you're interested in finding out more about that, there's the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, has these amazing pesticide use maps, and you can just Google USGS pesticide maps, and you'll be able to take a look at kind of estimates of pesticide use across the country. Interesting. Yeah. Not surprising. It's still available though, up to now. You can still look at the data. So at any rate, and I also just wanted to flag that this set of issues is part of a broader set of issues about insect decline. Folks might have heard in the news earlier this year, some studies came out that really raised the alarm about insect declines around the world and what that means for our ecosystem health. So again, pollinators are a piece of this bigger story. To focus in on honeybees, so what's the problem? Why is this an issue? So over the last dozen years or so, 30 to 45% of the honeybees have been lost every year. So there are losses every year in the population. So that's since about 2006. I have some state-by-state figures, so that's an overall kind of general figure. There's state-by-state figures, and I'm curious if people want to shout out a state that they want to hear the percent loss from, and I'll let you know what the data says. Can you hold this for a second? Ohio? All right, let's see what we got. Hold on. Where's my map?
May I share with them about the Bee Informed Partnership and the actual study that's done for that? Sure. So the statistics come from a survey. Bee Informed Partnership is one organization that has collected data, but we don't have funding currently. Our legislation is not going to allow that study to be done. They're not funding it for this next year. So if we want something like that done, we're going to have to rise up together as a group and try to make these statistics come about. And honestly, I think it would be a good idea because statistics are really hard to get an accurate number. I think the success rate is usually around 30%. Maybe you could tip closer to 50, but it's really difficult. Honestly, a lot of the beekeepers we work with don't answer the surveys. So I have a hard time thinking that these surveys are providing us what we need, and I think we need to dissect how to make these surveys more effective or in the future. That's just a personal goal of mine, so thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, these numbers that I'm going to shout out are from the 2017-2018 season. We just got the numbers from the 2019 season earlier this year, and they're the highest losses that we've ever seen across the board. The next week, USDA said they are going to stop the program of monitoring those losses. So that is problematic. So Ohio, 27.3, so that's on the lower side. So that's the percent of the bees that were lost in that 2017-2018 season. Any other states folks want to hear that? North Carolina, 55.1. California, 34.4. Colorado is fairly low, 23.1. Florida, 40% losses. Okay, go ahead.
So one theory about one of the reasons why Colorado is a little bit lower than some other states is that we have a lot of federally protected land, Forest Service land, BLM land, and some of our professional beekeepers actually run their hives on big tracts of Forest Service land where pesticides are not being used, and they were far enough in that the bees they probably are accessing ag lands where pesticides are used, but some of what they're accessing for their forage is more natural and not treated. That's just one theory. That may or may not be true.
To add to that, we see also a trend in places that have less development, also land that's protected, but also not as much urban dwelling. Urban settings are a completely different animal, but in suburban and residential areas, a lot of the backyard beekeepers we interact with are having more losses now because of residents using ornamental plants that are treated with systemic pesticides and also treating their property.
Great. Okay, couple more. Any more states? Anybody I missed? Louisiana is very high, 69% losses in Louisiana. Montana, also high, 61% losses. Pennsylvania looks like 68.4, so very high. So you can see there's a range. And, from 23 to the highest I see is 77% losses in a state. The lowest looks like it is actually Colorado.
And the highest state, which was that?
And the highest state, no, it looks like it's Nevada.
77% in Nevada?
Or is that Nevada or Arizona? Arizona. Arizona is highest. 77.9% losses. Yeah. Okay, so that gives you a flavor of kind of the problem that we're facing. This is a problem for our food system, right? So then the question is why? What's happening? What's causing this problem? So it's a combination of factors. So there's disease, there's habitat loss, there's climate impacts, and there are pesticides. And those are all interacting together, right? And so one of the things that a lot of the studies have shown about the pesticide exposures is that they exacerbate the stresses from these other effects. So for example, some of the pesticides compromise the immune system of bees, making them more susceptible to disease, right? And so they are interacting impacts. There's also studies that show that pesticides actually can have behavioral effects and impair the bee's ability to forage. Well, that interacts with habitat issues, right? If habitat is less and less, and the bees don't have less and less capacity to forage or get actually confused, their neurological effects, then that's going to affect their success rate as well. Who's heard of neonics? No? Okay. So neonics is a class of pesticides. It's neonicotinoid pesticides that are very widely used. They're known to be very harmful to honeybees and other pollinators. A lot of these studies that I'm talking about that have showed immune system effects and behavioral effects have been on neonic pesticides. Neonics, what's interesting about neonics is it's what's called a systemic pesticide, which means that it's often the way that it's used is it's a seed treatment. So the seeds are doused in this chemical, they're then planted, and then that chemical goes up through the entire system of the plant and then is in the pollen that the bees forage on, right? So it has that effect. There's actually many studies showing that the neonic use isn't actually beneficial to farmers. It actually, EPA itself did a study that said it's not really providing any help to farmers, and so we've been pushing really hard to reduce the use of neonics in seed treatment. Let's see. So a little bit about sort of where we're at in terms of policy. So neonics have, several of the most widely used neonics have been banned in Europe. We are working with our partners in Pan UK and Pan Europe to be sure those bans are permanent. They're also working on kind of a bee guidance document so that new chemicals that are approved have to consider the impact on pollinators. So that's moving forward. Here in the US, recently 12 neonic products were taken off the market, and that was a result of a lawsuit that we were part of together with the Center for Food Safety. These are, however, the products, not the chemicals themselves, so they can be reformulated into other products that will continue to be used. There are ongoing risk assessment processes at the federal level on these bee-harming pesticides, the neonics. It's been incredibly slow and many times delayed, as you could expect. Another thing that happened recently is a cousin of neonics, a new pesticide called sulfoxaflor, had been pulled off the market because of a lawsuit that beekeepers filed in 2015, because EPA was going to go ahead and approve this pesticide without enough data about what the impacts were on pollinators. And so because of this lawsuit, it was taken off the market. Just recently, a few weeks ago, this EPA approved not only existing uses of sulfoxaflor, but expanded uses to new plants and new uses out there in the market. So, and then the other thing that is just in terms of national level policy, right? We're doing some organizing to push back on a rollback of a rule that was put in place in 2014 that said that neonics could not be used in wildlife refuges. Again, this administration has taken that ban away. So neonics are now used on wildlife refuges again. So we're pushing for legislation to put that back in place and protect our pollinators on public lands. I want to say just a couple more words about the science, and then a couple of words about our work in Minnesota to protect pollinators there. So this weekend, there's actually an international pollinator conference at UC Davis that's been happening. And so I've been watching kind of the results from that and what the news is coming out of that. And what's clear is it's not just neonics that are causing the problem. As the science kind of moves ahead and more is understood about how chemicals are affecting pollinators, it's more than the neonic problem. So one stat that's kind of staggering is that they've documented 124 different pesticides in pollen. Now, not very much is known about how the synergistic effects, like how those different chemicals are interacting together in harming pollinators. Another thing that's emerging is that fungicides, it turns out, are also really harmful to pollinators. And there are studies also about the harms of herbicides, and also the fact that just monocropping, just acres and acres of the same crops, is problematic for pollinators. They need biodiversity, right? So more and more studies are showing that sort of this chemical-intensive agriculture that is so prevalent is just bad for pollinators in general. Okay, so then finally, I'll just wrap up with a little bit about our work in Minnesota. Again, that's one of our key states where we campaign in coalition with beekeepers and farmers and activists that are concerned about pollinators. And because of the organizing and pressure there, 2 years ago, a governor's commission on pollinator protection was formed that brought together stakeholders that were concerned about these issues. And this commission just released in the fall of 2018 a set of more than 40 recommendations for how pollinators should be protected. And many of them include reducing or eliminating the use of these harmful pesticides. And so we're now working on being sure that those recommendations go into effect. And one of the things that's happened this past spring was that legislation was passed allocating $900,000 that is going to be used as an incentive for homeowners to transition their lawns into bee-friendly environments, to plant native species, bee-friendly species, to attract and support pollinators throughout Minnesota. So one of the other things that we're doing is sharing and learning, sharing lessons from that work in Minnesota with other states. And there have been a lot of states, as you'll hear more about here in Colorado and in Florida, a lot of states are moving forward with various actions to protect pollinators, so we're coordinating that. There's also a lot of local communities that have passed ordinances that are protective, that basically disallow bee-harming pesticides on public lands, for example. So North Carolina right now is pushing for a ban on consumer uses of neonics. That's already been passed in Maryland and Connecticut. There are policy activities in Oregon, California. So there's really a lot of momentum. People are concerned about this. And because we're not seeing any progress at the national level, state and local is really where we need to focus. So with that, I will hand it over to Jennifer to talk about, from a beekeeper's perspective, why this is important.
Thank you, Kristen. When I started beekeeping, and I'm relatively new to beekeeping, considering some people have had it in their families for generations, as with many other farming practices that we have here and elsewhere. So about 15 years I've been a beekeeper. So my main occupation is to raise bees, assist in pollination efforts, and produce honey. We also actually raise bees and queens for other beekeepers. One of the reasons why that list is so long is because since we've started beekeeping, we've really had to interact with difficulties. And the difficulties are very widespread, as Kristen's already shared with you, and many of you probably already realize. And it's not just the food supply situation, but I will address pollination as one of the biggest ones at the moment, because a lot of the losses from the survey and the stats that we have from this past year are really, truly, some of the sourcing is coming from pollination of food crops. And a lot of those food crops are genetically modified and or use seeds that are treated with neonicotinoids. And I think that we've reached a threshold where pollinators are really having a difficult time with the stacked stressors. So it used to be a little easier for us to maintain natural beekeeping practices in our hives. We did it, my husband and I and our family, for years, and still participated in pollination events with conventional farms. We were seeking natural farming and organic farming, but in our region and with the type of people that are growing food, we didn't have access to it. So we were doing the best we could to raise bees naturally, participate in this type of farming pollination event. We found that even with the best management practices we could provide, including monitoring the adaptation and genetics of the bees that we like to raise, that we feel are healthy in our region, we've now reached that 40% loss ourselves, which is heartbreaking. And also from a business perspective and from a humanitarian and earthwide perspective, I really think we've kind of got to act very quickly and make some very big decisions. I won't take up too much time because I know Sue has a lot of great stuff to share too, but I just want to say that this is a really diverse situation, and I think it's going to need us all to look a little more in detail at the way pollinators respond to their environment. So it's not necessarily just pesticides. It's now becoming a situation where genetically bees are having a difficult time adapting. So what does that mean for us? We have to look a little bit more at the way we act as citizens and how we maintain our landscape. If it's a small landscape, like we have a yard, we could easily learn to devote more of that yard to native plants that have grown in our region without irrigation, don't need any pesticides or any kind of treatment. Weeds are definitely our friends. Almost every weed that most people like to get rid of is something that is beneficial to a pollinator and are possibly edible. So it's kind of like a win-win. but we have to change the way we value things and what we're looking to achieve. But from a real, very passionate and deep perspective, I think that pollinators won't really have a good advantage until a large percentage of us individually make a shift. And again, it's been difficult to make these changes with the reliance of national policy and international policy. Just about any organization like Slow Food and other really big organizations that have a very strong passion and vested interest in things turning around are working around the clock with every resource they have. And we've figured out that we have to make these changes individually and also share this message with others. So I hope that's a little food for thought for all of you. I'm going to keep practicing beekeeping the way I think is natural and best. Try to instill that upon others, and also do the best I can to ditch all my grass in my front yard and plant just food. So if you want to come eat a pineapple, you have to come visit me in Florida. Mangoes, things of that nature. And I'd love to hear more about, your region. And this is things that we can do together, is to create sort of a terroir for other people so that they know, like when they come to Colorado, I have never been. I'm learning a little bit more about the situation here with bees, what's working, and it gives me hope and something to also take back home with me and share with others. So thank you for that. I'm going to share the mic with Sue.
All right, then. So I'm going to go back to a couple of things that Kristen was talking about that I think are really important to note on the federal level, and then I want to drill down a little bit more into Colorado and sort of what's happening here. And by the way, my front lawn is almost all oregano. Now, it smells great when you mow it. It's like you're in a pizza parlor or something, but the bees really love the flowers, so it's all in flower right now, and it's beautiful. But at the federal level, I think it's really important to understand how it is that pesticides get registered and what some of it is that's going on there. Because even though the current administration is definitely challenging around these kinds of issues of chemical toxins and deregulation, it's a long-standing issue. And one of the things is that the EPA has been the agency responsible for registering pesticides and allowing them to be sold in the marketplace. And the information that they use, the data that they use pretty much entirely is data that is provided by the companies that make the pesticides. So I think it's a really important point. So you can make your own evaluative judgment about that, but if it's a company that's producing a chemical for sale and they make money off that chemical, I don't know. It's not independent peer-reviewed science that the EPA is using, and that's true long before the current administration. So I think it's a really important point to note. The other really important point to note about pesticides being used both in agriculture and in people's own yards is that the science also pretty much just gives data on individual chemicals. So when a farmer or a manufacturer puts those chemicals together and combines them into what in farming lingo is tank mix. I have a little farm north of town here. I live up in Longmont and have a little farm up there. And so, the tank mixes that get sprayed by, those big sprayers that go around, the big pivot irrigators, they put the chemicals in those and, it's a tank mix. And so they mix a tank of, they might be mixing an insecticide, an herbicide, and a fungicide all together. The data, and there's very little science, it shows us what the synergistic effects are of those chemicals mixed together. So while one chemical may or may not be harmful, when you mix it with a different chemical, that can create a whole other thing, that it can be really dangerous. And I'm not just talking about to pollinators, I'm also talking about to human health. And the other thing is that they don't have to disclose the inert ingredients. So when you buy something over the counter, like at your local hardware store, you look at the label and it says active ingredients and inert ingredients. They don't have to disclose necessarily what those inert ingredients are, and some of those ingredients are just as harmful as the active ingredients. So that's just something to think about. And I think what Jennifer said as well is about sort of the cultural changes that we all need to make. I mean, think about dandelions. Now, dandelions, they're scourge, they're terrible, we don't want them in our lawns, right? And we have been led to believe, we have been, acculturated to lawns are supposed to be these, manicured, everything's green, every blade of grass is the same length, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want dandelions. Well, the truth of the matter is that dandelions are, at least around here, one of the most important early foods for bees, honeybees, as well as native pollinators. So they're really important. Well, we tell our public land managers, our local parks people, well, we don't want dandelions in our local parks, we don't want them in our lawns, all that kind of stuff. I think we need to change how we view both lawns and our own personal property, as well as our public spaces. Grass is great. I mean, it's wonderful for certain things, but long ago, the industry told us that we shouldn't have white clover in our lawns. Well, white clover in our lawns is actually a really good thing. It's helpful, it provides pollination, it also fixes nitrogen, it's good for the soil. So we've been told to get that out of our lawns, and there's products that are sold that, we shouldn't have Dutch white clover or whatever clover you've got in your region in our lawn. Well, I'm out there seeding Dutch clover into my lawn. And I think we need to culturally change how we think about our landscapes around us. I think that's a really important piece. Some of the other things, and I'm going to take it more local at this point in Colorado, is that we do work at the local level. So we work with, for example, we have a program that we're partnered with Beyond Pesticides, another national organization, on to try and help local communities transition their public parks to organic turf management. So managing without intensive chemicals. That pilot is going right now in Longmont. I think we're about to start it in Englewood as well. We've been trying to get Denver to get on board. That's something that we can do, is work with local communities to change their practices with respect to particularly our public spaces. But we can also do neighborhood organizing to change how our neighbors are thinking about their landscapes, and work and educate our neighbors on how they're managing our own properties. Because these chemical companies have told us that we have to use products like Roundup. Now, how many people have heard about the Roundup lawsuits that have been happening, right? So juries have been awarding, this is not an M, this is a B, billions of dollars to plaintiffs. We've had 3 major lawsuits, there's more coming, around the effects of Roundup. Now, you watch it on the television and you see those commercials with little cartoon characters and, it's all good. So think about that, and I think about tobacco. Back in the day, tobacco was advertised as a health product. Now, this is probably long before many of us here were born, but it was a health product. And now we know that maybe it's not a health product. Maybe it's actually kind of bad for us, and we got the government to start putting warnings labels on cigarette packages. Well, I think we're going to see, hopefully, and it depends because the federal government is very different now than it was back then. Ideally, we see that same thing happening around pesticides, is that these things that are advertised as these wonderful products that we all need, well, maybe they're not so good for us, for human health. We know they're not good for pollinator health. So go back to the local level. At the local level, we often get calls from people saying, I really want my community, Fort Collins or Colorado Springs or whatever, to ban these pesticides. The problem we have here in Colorado and in many other states across the country is that we have something called preemption. Now, if you've been involved in the fracking debate at all, you know what preemption is. That means that the state has control, and local communities are not allowed to ban whatever it is. So, fracking, or in this case, pesticides. They can't ban pesticides at the local level. So the only thing we can do is actually have a community pass a resolution that says, we're not going to use these products. And then we have to work with their land use management departments to hopefully stop using these products. But that preemption is also something that in the recent Farm Bill, the federal government tried to get preemption, meaning that they tried to be able to take the right of states to regulate that away. Thankfully, they were not successful this time, but it's the kind of thing that we have to pay attention to in the policy realm. Local preemption, state preemption, that means that local communities or states could not regulate pesticides or ban a particular pesticide if it's really causing harm. So those are things that we need to think about. I can go on, and I know that we're.
Go ahead and transition to how people
Yeah.
get involved.
Okay. So I'll start with how do people get involved? What can you do? So I'm going to start at the very local, at the very personal level. What can you do? Like in my case, we have a little farm. We manage that whole farm. It's about 12 acres. We managed it all organically. We don't use any chemicals. Okay, that means we have some backbreaking work of mechanical weed removal. Weeds are, while they're good, they're also a problem because they can choke out other plants and create a monoculture of weeds, which we don't want that monoculture either. So we have to pull those weeds. We pull them by hand. We do other methods of mulching to try and get rid of weeds. It's hard, but we don't need all the chemicals that are advertised. So change your own practices in your own backyard. Excuse me. If you just have a regular suburban or urban yard, you do not need these chemicals to be using them in your own backyard. So I think that's one thing. Plant flowers. Plant good flowers. Make sure when you buy your flowers that you're asking your nursery whether or not they've been pre-treated with any kinds of neonics or other systemic pesticides. Talk to your nurseries, talk to places where you buy flowers to make sure that they are chemical free. Plant flowers, preferably native flowers. Plant lots of them. Get rid of your lawn. Your lawn is a food desert. It doesn't provide any food for pollinators at all. If you don't need a lawn or you need you can get by with a smaller lawn. I mean, if you have dogs, I have dogs, they do like a little bit of lawn. That's where they like to do their business. So we keep a little lawn, but most of it can go away. So at the very local level, those are some of the things that you can do, and then be a good consumer. The more we demand organic products, hopefully consumer demand will win out and we'll get those organic products. So when you can, buy organic. I know it's more expensive. You may not be able to do that. But if you can, choose that because we want to create that consumer demand so that, farmers that are growing stuff go, oh, organic is more lucrative. It's better. It's going to make us more money. We want to create that demand in the agricultural sector. I forgot one thing, I'm sorry, in the policy realm. It's sort of science and policy realm. So I'm going to go backwards for a bit at the federal level. The USGS, which no longer is producing the pesticide maps under the current administration, one of the things that they have done is that they have done water sampling of waterways and neonics and other pesticides in our waterways. And one of the things that they have found consistently in doing that is that the pesticide load per capita and per square foot is higher in runoff coming from urban and suburban areas than it is typically from agricultural areas. Now, that's a broad statement. It varies from place to place. But the reason for that is because local people, us, in our yards, are using pesticides at a rate of oftentimes 12 to 20 times per square foot what is the recommended rate. So we're not reading the label, we're not paying attention to it, we're not following the directions, and we're thinking, oh, whatever, if a little bit is good, a lot is even better. And so the runoff issues into the waterways, because neonicotinoids are water soluble, is actually higher per square area than it is oftentimes for agricultural areas, because they're going to actually more or less apply according to the label because it's expensive, and over vast tracts of land they don't want to overuse the product, mostly because of financial and economic issues, whereas in our own yards we oftentimes are overusing products. So that's something to think about, is that we need to be doing a lot of work in our urban and suburban areas to reduce the pesticide use, because it's not just agriculture at all, it's us in our own yards. Sorry.
So I think Sue said everything, and I don't have anything to share.
Oh, I got more.
I'm just kidding. I have a ton to share. On an individual level, years ago, there used to be a lot of documentation pertaining to things that grew really well in the areas that we live, but this is changing quickly with the way the climate is changing. So I think there's a lot of new data that needs to be taken in order to help others know what to plant, when it blooms, what species of pollinator it benefits. And this is across the board. I'm talking birds, bats, butterflies, every pollinator, whether it stings or not. The thing that we didn't touch on yet that I think is important is the habitat in a little bit more of a diverse way. If you get rid of grass, you're really doing a huge, great thing. But also, we tend to compact soil and we tend to mulch and use weed barrier. This prevents a lot of solitary pollinators from having a home. And they're very important. Honeybees are really well studied and well portrayed in the media, not only for their issues, but they're just, you ask people about pollinators, and I think honeybee is probably the number one answer. But, you know, how many species do we have? Does anybody want to take a guess? How many species of pollinators there are? 1 million, did you say? 5 million. I wish there were 5 million or 10 million because I love pollinators. There's approximately 20,000 species of pollinators. So just imagine we're talking about honeybees and then there's 999,000 more approximately. That's a lot. So we, by our own practices, do prevent them from having a good habitat, and that alone will do a lot. You can actually also create a pollinator-friendly sort of manufactured home, and some of them are really neat. If you look online to look for like a pollinator hotel or something to that like, and you'll find some really cool things that you're going to want to have in your yard. They actually look really neat. And then you can interact with them, and I have to tell you that is actually beneficial for your health too. So the habitat is definitely a big one. The point about mixing chemicals and using things that are individually labeled safe for either home use or industrial use is a very big take home. There's very little studying done on anything but lethal effects of pesticides on pollinators. So in studies, if pollinators don't instantly die from being exposed to a pollinator, it's very unlikely that they're going to find a very large risk for that pesticide against pollinators. And in combination, herbicides and fungicides, or pesticides and fungicides, do have a higher rate. They did do one study where it proved that the fungicides added in the mix in the tank was very lethal for pollinators, and it didn't take very long. And there's absolutely nothing to prevent that from happening in many large food crops, some that we admire because we're not interested in, say, supporting large factory farming or monocrops. So those of us have looked for alternatives. Let's just say almonds, for example. How many of you like to source your milk for almonds instead of dairy? I know a lot of people who do try to stay away from dairy. Well, just to give you a new perspective on almonds, they're using a lot of herbicides and fungicides mixed in the tank. And if 2018 is any indicator on how almond pollination is going, it was an actual tragedy. There were more dead bees there than I have personally ever seen in my life, and it was quite heartbreaking. I would love to see us grow something that grows quicker, a shorter, quicker growing seed that's full of essential fatty acids and fat and protein, like maybe sunflower or hemp. So we have other foods. We have diverse choices of foods. We eat maybe 50 foods, but there's again, just like the pollinators, hundreds of varieties of just any one of them alone. Sunflowers, you know how many varieties of sunflowers there are? So we have a job that we can do to improve things, and even, like I said, us starting together individually and then working our way through our local community. Working with our local legislators is going to be very effective because those are the people that you elect, and those are the people that you pay your taxes to, and you can ask them for these things. And you can form as a community to get these things accomplished, and then work even harder with better resources to work on a state, national, and international level. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. So the only thing I would add, in addition to what we can do as consumers, being smart, kind of shifting how the food system works, and what we can do as individual homeowners, what I would add in terms of what people can do is get informed if this is an issue you care about. And actually, Emma has some copies of a couple of blogs that about some of the issues that I talked about earlier about insect diversity and about USDA rolling back the actual data collection about bee losses. So get informed, get political. So in addition to getting to know your local politicians, get to know your state and federal politicians. They work for you. Make it a two-way relationship, you know. Call them, email them, be in contact with them if this is an issue you care about. A couple of just specific things happening right now at the national level where people can plug in. I actually have a petition that we're circulating about the wildlife refuge issue, where you can urge your representative in Congress to support a bill that will reinstate that ban on neonics in wildlife refuges. So I'll circulate this so folks can sign on if they want to. And then there's also a national legislation, the Save Our Pollinators Act. has been introduced in Congress. It has, I think, 52 co-sponsors right now. Need to build momentum around that. And then the other thing people could do is organize. If this is an issue you really care about, find what organizations like Sue's are working in your state, in your community, and plug in. If there isn't an organization, start to build one. Organize community events. See what you can do about getting a local ordinance in your community, a resolution that limits use of these chemicals on public lands. Write letters to the editor. And become a spokesperson. If this is an issue you care about, speak out about it. And then the last thing I would say is just for those that are interested in the work we're doing, stay in touch with PAN. If you go to pana.org/sign up, we distribute information about this and other pesticide-related issues and action alerts where you can target your own representatives at the state level or national level. So just get involved. So, yeah, Sue.
Oh, yeah. I'm not done yet. No. Just to add to what she said, get political, vote. Make sure you're registered to vote. And this is across the board on so many issues, but vote, 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 vote. Because these legislators, whether it's your congressional delegation or your state legislators, and one of the things to remember is that, or your city councils, those folks have hundreds of issues that they have to be, quote, experts in. They don't have a lot of information. If this is an issue you care about, or any issue is an issue you care about, make sure that they understand the basic facts, and then make sure that they get elected. Vote.
And I would add, yesterday afternoon, I was part of a really great workshop that Slow Food folks put on over here in the salon about how to be a good advocate and just tips for communicating with your legislator at whatever level. And so I think the Slow Food Network is a really good resource for that, and is looking for ways to get out some tools and tips and resources so folks can be more effective advocates. So with that, we would like to open it up for your questions. Emma, do you want to take one of these?
So, that bill, the HR 2854.
Do you want to just do it over the loudspeaker so everyone else
yeah.
can hear you?
Sorry. Just to clarify, please, that to co-sponsor or to urge our legislators to co-sponsor HR 2854, that's just a House bill right now? It has to go to the Senate?
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
The wildlife, yes. Just in the House for now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here you are.
Hi, thank you. My name is Alana Reynolds, and I'm from Springfield, Illinois. I sat in on the Slow Bees call that Jennifer hosted a little while ago and asked this question, and there may not be a good answer to it, like you said that day. But how do you make people care? Like, how do you approach a neighbor and say, I have a beehive across the street, and I would like you to stop spraying this now? What is there, like a one-pager that I can read to a lot of the people in my community that don't seem to want to change their mind? Or why would that matter to them? How do you approach people?
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
we had a chance to talk about this over the phone, so it would be good to hear your perspective. My answer, I haven't really met anybody that didn't want to support pollinators. Usually when I ask that question, people say yes, I do want to help, but it is sometimes an issue from neighbor to neighbor, one property to the other. So it is a very big fish, and I would love to hear your perspective on it. I usually just ask, and usually I prevail in the end with kindness, but it is very diverse. But let's see what you have to share.
I think it's hard because I think prevailing with kindness is absolutely it, but on any issue with your neighbors, right? You want to have good neighbors. You want to be friendly with your neighbors, because neighborhood animosity is not a good thing. Nobody wants to live like that. So our approach is trying to do neighbor-to-neighbor education. And yes, there's lots of sort of one-page fact sheets on a variety of different websites. I think we have one on ours. They're definitely around. I usually try and start with pretty basic level education with people about understanding the impacts of chemicals, and in really basic level, because I think most people don't really understand it. The problem is that there's some people who don't want to understand it. And it's just kind of like climate change. There are people who do not believe in climate change. They don't believe that humans are changing the climate. I personally believe that and don't even think it's a matter of belief, but there are other people who do. So understanding that, and I think meeting people where they are and trying to help figure that out and help them understand that. As a beekeeper myself, and I started beekeeping when I actually lived in a neighborhood, we would give honey to our neighbors, and we would talk to them about how do bees produce honey. And we would try and affect them by kindness and by sweetness, and educate as we went along. And we have a whole pledge program at PPAN where we try and encourage people to take the pledge to manage their own yards in a pollinator-friendly way, and do that education neighbor to neighbor. But like any issue where you're trying to make neighborhood change, it can be hard and you may run up against resistance. I know that doesn't answer your question. There is no sort of silver bullet, if you will. I think it's about communication, and it's about education.
I would just add a couple thoughts. I think a lot of people don't realize how essential pollinators are to our food system. Like, what is at least 30, probably much more percentage of the food we eat relies on pollinators, either wild pollinators or honeybees. And so sort of everybody eats, right? So having that conversation about this is a problem, this is a crisis. And this is affecting what's going to be available in the farmer's market, on our shelves. I think that's one way also to have the conversation with folks. I was also going to add, I forgot to mention, we also have a honeybeehaven.org is a website where we highlight a lot of this information, and where people can also map their own honeybee havens. And there are local communities that have honeybee haven ordinances across the country are there, mapped on honeybeehaven.org, and individuals can also map their own havens as well when they've taken this pledge about how they're going to manage their own property.
Hi, I'm Megan Swanson. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and for us, my boyfriend and I, if we wanted to approach the city of Charleston, what positions, who specifically would we go to? I'm pretty good at finding their information, but just knowing specific roles who you should go to as citizens to start asking these questions and getting the pesticides out of our parks.
Okay. We have actually a whole training program on local organizing. So I'm going to boil this down into a couple of pieces. So when you're going to your local communities to try and change a practice, whatever that practice is, I think one of the things to keep in mind is what you don't want to do is sort of separate your elected officials from the paid staff, the professional staff. It's really important to get the professional staff on board as best you can, because if you go to the elected officials and say your staff that you're responsible for are doing bad things, it sets up a dynamic that is really not workable. So I always recommend that you do a two-pronged approach, that if you know your elected officials, it's good to start meeting with them, and even if you don't know them, get to know them and start meeting with them. But I would also contact your parks and recreation or parks and open space or whatever it's called in your community staff, people who manage the golf course, people who manage roadways. And go to, you can find them on your city's website, I'm sure, and see if you can set up a meeting with the department head and just talk to them. Not in an antagonistic way, but talk to them about what are the chemicals they're using, what are they using, and why are they using them, and just do some basic education the same way you would with your neighbors, but kill them with kindness, because I can tell you that municipal staff often feel like they're under a lot of pressure and they're like under the gun, and people are looking at them and they're criticizing them all the time. You want to make friends with them. You want to say, we're on your side. How can we help? How can we support you? dual track. At the same time, I would be meeting with your local elected officials and talking to them about the issues and letting them know that you are meeting with the Parks and Rec staff or whoever it is, whatever change you're trying to make. And do that at the same time so that they converge. There's also sample resolutions, sample ordinances out there. Write it for them. Write the resolution. If you can do an ordinance and you don't have preemption in your state around pesticide use, great. If you have state preemption and you can't ban a pesticide or stop them from using it, write a resolution. There's samples out there. Write it for them and go to them and say, here's the kind of thing that we'd like you to consider. Figure out your strategy and then work through the strategy of how do you meet with each elected official so that you count your votes in advance. It's always a good thing to do. Know you have your votes. And then figure out what your strategy is for going to your city council. We took us 4 or 5 years in the city of Longmont to pass a resolution. Took us that many years with the city of Denver to pass a resolution, or in the city of Denver's case, it's called a proclamation. It's not a resolution. But it's different in every community. So you have to figure out what it is that you can do at your local level. But the main thing is don't separate your elected officials from the paid staff because it will backfire on you, guaranteed.
Thank you very much. And just to ask one more question, because you ladies are such a wonderful resource. On top of that, if I look for a sample resolution, are the economic piece of it, I can do that obviously myself, or Chris is a landscape architect, so maybe he could. But just figuring out the economic benefit of doing something like that, is that included on those resolutions online, the sample ones?
Yeah, and I think Beyond Pesticides has some really good data about that. I don't know, Pam, you have good data on that? Yeah, Beyond Pesticides is probably your best resource because and also Xerces. You familiar with Xerces? I think they have good economic data, and Xerces has a really good training program as well. That can really talk a lot about how cities can save money through, like we did that with CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation. So here's how you can save money. You're not mowing as much, you're not applying chemicals as much. You can save money.
I would just add to that too, community redevelopment areas, especially within city limits, county limits, and statewide, sometimes they're really open to projects like this. And since you have the ability to set a great example with the work you do and the landscaping, what you essentially do is create something that other people are attracted to. They see how it's working, they want to do it themselves, and then you have a model for success to replicate, duplicate, and share with others. And then if you find that within other places, you can utilize those resources too. And again, just write it down, share it with others, broadcast it, tell us, we'll do it, all that good stuff.
I think we have time for one more question, but I wanted to ask Jennifer to say just a couple word about slow bees, since we're here at Slow Food Nations, because I know that's an effort that you've been driving, so you can talk about that.
Thank you. Slow Bees is, so Slow Food has communities. There's Slow Seeds, which is, there's a seed swap happening right there next to us. And Slow Seeds is kind of a new community that's just about to happen. Ones that have already been in existence for a while, Slow Fish, Slow Cheese, Slow Meat. These are important communities that are usually a direct result of delegates and folks that work through Slow Food internationally and see how important these issues really are. Slow Food does a tremendous amount of work on a diverse range of subjects, and there's a lot of people involved, and they're almost all, I'd say, volunteers. There's very little resources. We have to create pretty much everything that is done through our own efforts and fundraising. So again, after being at Terra Madre, which if you're not familiar, this is kind of like a Terra Madre. It's in Italy every 2 years, which is where Slow Food was founded. And this is an international celebration for everything that Slow Food stands for. And at Terra Madre in 2018, the president, Carlo Petrini, made a very heartwarming and enriching speech that if you didn't feel something, I would say maybe something's wrong. Like you really just feel like you have to go home and emulate and share a lot of what you glean and get out of that. So I came back really empowered. I reached out to other delegates of Terra Madre in the past that had worked with bees and pollinators, and together we went through the steps that are needed in order to create a community through Slow Food International. And so Slow Bees is an actual community. We are very new, not as organized as some of the other communities, but our first action happened on May 20th, World Bee Day in 2019. We asked everybody to plant one for pollinators. So that's a hashtag. And basically all it means is, and it's an inclusive action, anything you can do to increase the forage, which we've covered quite a bit here today, but also to go out and be a beacon and share that with others so that pollinators really do stand a chance to get more nourishment and do better overall. So thank you. Stay tuned. Look for Slow Bees on Facebook, hopefully Instagram soon, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here and engaging, and we'll be around for a little while. So if you have other questions, we'll be here. Thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.